This week on STC, we await the latest iPhone software update. It has some very interesting new features. The smart devices in your home are a serious threat, but new laws may or may not be about to fix that. And Apple versus Google has just taken another surprising twist.
So it's been a really big couple of weeks for privacy, security. Lots of different things have been happening since we last recorded, haven't they? One of the most interesting things is Apple suing NSO Group. So what's been going on there, Zach? You've been looking into this, haven't you?
We all know about NSO and Pegasus, and clearly Apple is treading where Facebook has been before and still is, right? And is continuing with its own action. I think the interesting part of the story for the billion plus iPhone users out there is Apple's change of approach. So we were highly critical of Apple in the summer when the iMessage exploits were making headlines and Apple was kind of not saying very much. And then when it did talk, it kind of said, well, it's not hit many people. And you kind of remember, I think it was 14.7, and did it fix it? Did it not fix it? And no one could work it out, and the whole black box software thing here. Anyway, now we've seen some openness, bit of transparency from Apple, explain what went on, what it's doing to fix the problem, and the fact that it will warn people that are hit in the future. So I think we all welcome that as a change of tack from Apple, and that I think is maybe the bigger story than the specifics of NSO, which is clearly on its knees at the moment.
Yeah, the reporting, the warning of users interested me because this is something that Google have been doing for a while with their advanced security program for journalists, politicians, those people who are more likely to be attacked. They've been warning those users of state-sponsored attacks on them for a while now, for months and months and months. It just seems that Apple are playing catch up a lot lately.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because Google has offered the kind of the advanced protection stuff in Android for some time now, and has kind of been talking a lot about that even recently. And Apple hasn't had any of that in the past. And what we've seen, Apple's kind of played the whole safety, security, privacy thing across the patch. But maybe this is the start of an interesting aspect for Apple where it can follow Google. So there are clearly journalists, dissidents, people in certain territories that might be targeted by more sophisticated attacks. Is there going to be an additional layer of security you can add to your iPhone? What was interesting in terms of Apple's the stuff that came out from Apple on NSO was it talks about the fact that, if you like, the attack was, we kind of knew this, but it was confirmed, it was inside the iCloud enclave. So in essence, you're using the trusted ecosystem to attack a device. So there are weaknesses within the software, and having everything is from the same organization, and Apple obviously has to do something about that now.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that's quite interesting about this, though, is how good it looks for Apple. And obviously there is a bit of PR in this, isn't there? This press release went up on Apple's website about them suing NSO. That is quite unusual. It hasn't happened for quite a few years, actually, that they've actually put a press release out to say exactly what they're doing. It's kind of very topical at the moment in the US, isn't it? Because the Biden administration is, talking a lot about this.
I mean, look, if you put the NSO thing to one side, clearly Facebook and Apple are both after NSO now, and that has weakened NSO. So I think on that side, the message is, if you are a commercial entity, we've seen Apple sue other people as well for messing around with the iPhone commercially and selling their wares, if you like. So I don't think that's not the first time, but you clearly can't set up an investable Western entity and go after big tech and expect big tech not to do anything about it. Contrast that with the Chinese hacking competition that you covered a couple of weeks ago, Davey, where they kind of stripped down an iPhone 13 with 1502, I think, had on it. So clearly the threat hasn't gone away, but good luck suing hackers in China as opposed to suing an entity that's backed by US investment here in the West. But again, the other thing, I guess, was slightly wryly, Kate, even if you read the lawsuit reads like a press release. I don't know if you read it, but it's literally like, iPhones are safer and here's all the reasons, and Androids are more dangerous and here's all the reasons. This is everything we're doing. And, you read a bunch of lawsuits. It's quite unusual to see one that is quite as PR glitzy as Apple's lawsuit against NSO.
And they're very good at this, aren't they? They're very good at purveying themselves as the company of security and privacy. And we've got to remember they're not perfect. They are better, actually, in terms of, what you get. And obviously what they're saying and how they're protecting the OS than Google. But at the end of the day, there are issues in terms of them patching things and being transparent and open about it. We do know security researchers have complained about how easy it is to get Apple to respond to them and then to actually fix these vulnerabilities, because, you know, Apple's taken quite a long time to fix things and to credit people with them a lot of the time.
Yeah, so that's a good point possibly to bring up. When's the next update coming for iOS, Kate? And what's it likely to bring with it?
Yeah, very good point. iOS 15.2 is on its way. We're expecting it within the next week or two. So late November, they did say late November, early December. At the moment, we're recording at the end of November. That big release comes with lots of new privacy features. There will be some security updates as well, which will be fairly important, probably. It's been a little while since security updates happened. But on top of that, we've also got 3 privacy features that are particularly interesting. One is an evolution of app tracking transparency, which is a app privacy report. So basically we can see what's happening with the apps that we're using and the permissions that they're accessing. So that's going to be really good. There's also something that is telling us when AirTags are tracking us. So basically we can actually see where any item may actually have been planted on us or tracking us, which is good update for kind of the anti-stalking side of things. And Apple has actually come under a lot of criticism for AirTags and whether, you know, they could be a danger to people, and maybe hasn't really addressed the privacy implications.
Is that likely to be an immediate notification that you're being tracked? Before it was a delay, wasn't there before?
Exactly. So that's the change we're seeing in 15.2, is that you will actually be able to see that very transparently and obviously if something is tracking you in there. So that's a change that Apple has made, I think, in response to a few complaints from people as well. The last update, and one of the best in my opinion, we talked about this before, is Hide My Email can actually be done directly from your Mail app on your iPhone now. So you can hide your email address when you're emailing anybody, pretty much, by going to the BCC field and just doing it directly from there. So it's really exciting stuff and coming soon.
So this is, I mean, the Hide My Email thing is interesting, isn't it? Because it's the latest Apple versus Google. You know, Apple makes a change, shows Google out. We've seen Private Relay and the whole Safari eradicating tracking cookies, which puts Chrome in a bad light. We've seen the Apple Maps versus Google Maps. We've seen iCloud Photos versus Google Photos. So we've seen a whole raft of privacy enhancements that have come from Apple that highlight the way in which Google doesn't appear to have users' privacy as its first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or maybe seventh priority, unsurprisingly, because, you know, follow the money. But I guess one of the things we've seen in the last few days is the tables being turned somewhat. So where Apple's weak is the fact that if you live within Apple's bubble, then it's all good. But if you step outside of that bubble and you start communicating and sharing with other people, then some of those privacy enhancements fall away. And one, or probably the most obvious example of that is iMessage, where you can only secure message people that also have iMessage, which means they have to be on an iPhone or another Apple device. It won't work. There's no, you know, web services or you know, apps to run an Android or anything like that. Google has been poking a little bit at this recently because it's obviously taking control of RCS and kind of SMS v2, which is a bit of a damp squib because it only works on Android because Apple's not playing. So you can see where this goes. And now Google has started to play around with, can it give users some of the iMessage experience on Android? So it's interpreting the kind of the likes, dislikes, you know, thumbs up, smiley face, emoticon kind of responses that people can put on messages, and trying to show them in its RCS client, if you like. And again, I think what this is highlighting is that it's a great area where Apple doesn't have users' interest at heart. It should absolutely open up iMessage.
What else that needs to be sorted out in 2021, although it's coming up for 2022 now, and it will be 2022 before this comes into play. Smart devices, internet connected devices, and the security sinkhole that they've become. And one government, the UK government, is set to be bringing a law in that hopes to try and close this sinkhole down a bit. and that's the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill, which isn't law as of yet, but it has now been read through in Parliament, and as soon as parliamentary time allows, it will become law and ask for royal assent from the Queen. So I've been looking at that this week and what it involves and what's left out.
So the big issue for IoT devices is passwords, isn't it?
One of. And amongst the measures being introduced here will be the banning by law of weak default factory loaded passwords on internet connected devices. Instead, they are going to have to be both unique and not resettable to a universal default, which is brilliant, and it sounds quite progressive. But you've got to remember that California passed a law banning default passwords on internet connected devices 3 years ago now. So, but there are other things as well, and the two other things that this UK law will bring in are the declaration of a minimum period of security updates. And if there are to be no security updates, so no patching, that also needs to be declared. And then the disclosure of security vulnerabilities will need to be done transparently.
It's interesting. I mean, anything to plug security gaps in IoT is welcome. And a couple of years ago, the FBI came out and their advice was, if you're going to run smart devices at home, you're going to run them on a shadow network. Most modern routers will allow you to do that. I reckon we could probably fit on this Zoom call the people globally who've done that. I think that's about how well that advice landed. But maybe we are starting to get to a place where it becomes more, when you set your router up, it's not hidden in, level 3 of the settings. It's just right. You set up 2 networks. You set up your IoT network, and it's called your IoT network or your smart device network. And you set up your main network, and you are just told in your apps that now run on modern routers and mesh networks to just put all of your smart devices onto your IoT network. So at least, there are clearly spyware style vulnerabilities, but it can't jump to the primary network where your data can be accessed.
Yeah, it's building things in from the start, isn't it? Because people are building great new products, but they're not building them with security in at all. And then they're being put in people's homes. They're not secure. I mean, we all kind of rely on IoT devices now, don't we? As much as I've always tried to avoid them as much as possible. Home security systems, for example, it's so convenient. It's so much easier. You can control them from your phone, but they are a security risk.
But again, it's that definition of what's a Internet of Things now. I think it's become a bit passé. Everything's internet connected.
Yeah.
So something that I don't think is covered by this legislation are printers. They'll fall into the same hole as laptops and desktops. Yet F-Secure researchers this week have found another problem affecting printers, not a Windows problem for a change. The printer spooler print nightmare thing has been patched, but what they're referring to as printing shells with a Z impacts more than 150 HP products. They looked at a multifunction printer and found that there were exploitable bugs, exploitable vulnerabilities in the comms board and the font parser that could give an attacker remote code execution. Now, HP's issued firmware patches, and I'll throw the links to those into my article. But this is important. You think of a printer and you don't really think of it as a threat to your network, but it is, because attackers who exploit vulnerabilities in printers can steal information, because there's a lot of information goes into a printer cache. They can introduce misinformation into a business. And more importantly, there's the potential to pivot to the business network itself. And that's quite serious, and people don't take it seriously enough. I mean, it comes back to Zach's point about isolating devices on networks. Printers shouldn't really be on that same network where it's so easy to hop over onto the main network and get into things you shouldn't.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Because printers, VoIP phones, whatever, you give them, particularly printers, you give them access to the outside world so they can go get their firmware updates. That introduces the risk, right? If your printer's isolated, they can't see anything, then you're fine. But the minute that printer's reaching out, if there's a vulnerability in that reach out, then that can be exploited. You can find that port, you can come back in, go through the printer onto the network, and then you can access everything because you're inside the network.